Hello to all dear friends. Welcome. Today we're going to take a look at the first half of the series, Penguin. This series has truly exceeded expectations and received excellent ratings. We're going to dive into the story up to this point and uncover some interesting and subtle details that you may not have noticed. Knowing these facts will definitely enhance your enjoyment of the rest of the series. Please note that this video contains spoilers. In this video, I'll be discussing some parts of the first episodes of Penguin. So if you haven't watched these episodes yet, it's better to skip the rest of the video. The series Penguin directly picks up from the events of the 2022 film The Batman. The first scene of the show starts with a radio broadcast summarizing the plot of the Batman film. This scene also includes images of events related to the character Riddler. In the movie The Batman, Riddler carries out a series of serial murders with the main goal of exposing the character Falcone. He also communicates his motives and plans to his followers via the internet. In one of the episodes of the series, we see Riddler's followers in the subway, wearing masks of the character, showing QR codes to the public, encouraging them to scan it and visit Riddler's website. On this site, users can view evidence of Riddler's crimes and listen to his speeches. These Riddler followers appear throughout the series, and their influence grows as the story unfolds. For instance, during the funeral of Sophia's brother, we observe a group of protesters carrying Riddler's symbol. Riddler's main goal was to trigger chaos and anarchy by detonating a bomb, flooding the city with seawater. He was so confident in the success of his plan that, at the beginning of the movie, he asked Batman to reveal his identity and be sent to Arkham Asylum, believing it to be the safest place for executing his plan. Throughout the series, the consequences of Riddler's bomb explosion are clearly depicted. We see missing persons photos posted on city walls, subway lines destroyed, and bridges broken, causing widespread damage to the city. The events of the series take place exactly 1 week after the events of the 2022 film The Batman. This is evident from the date inscribed on Alberto's gravestone. In the movie, Riddler's goal was to expose and ultimately eliminate Falcone by committing each murder. In the end, the character is killed in the film, but a different actor has been chosen for this role in the series. Mark Strong plays Falcone in the series, and his portrayal seems to be a better fit for the role, as his performance is much stronger compared to the actor in the film. After Falcone's death, the character Oz, or Penguin, decides to gain more power. The last scene we see of him in the movie shows him watching the city from a window. It seems that a plan is forming in his mind to take over all of Gotham for himself. However, this is far from easy, as Carmine Falcone was not someone who would step aside easily. Falcone was the head of a powerful mafia family, and one of his biggest businesses was the distribution of drugs throughout Gotham City. He also had very strong allies, especially the Maroni family, who were even more powerful than Falcone himself. Falcone continues to make connections with corrupt politicians and proposes that they evenly split the profits from all his illegal activities, provided that they completely eliminate the Maroni family and send them to prison. This plan eventually succeeds, and he successfully destroys the Maroni family. This act solidifies his power, making him the most powerful figure in Gotham. Throughout this process, the corrupt politicians ally with him and cover up all his illegal activities under the guise of fighting corruption. If you recall, in the Batman film, the first murder by Riddler was of the mayor of Gotham. After this murder, various newspapers were published around the city, pinned to the mayor's office wall, announcing the downfall of the Maroni family. These newspapers were designed in a way that the mayor, portrayed as an anti-corruption hero, would display them as his achievements. In reality, however, he was working with Falcone behind the scenes and was part of the corruption network. This is why Riddler, in the Batman film, wrote the word lies in blood on the boards he had put up around the city. This symbol represented the systemic corruption and the lies that were rampant in Gotham. After Falcone achieved his goal and took full control of Gotham's power, Penguin now faces new challenges. The biggest challenge is that, as a newcomer to the world of mafia and politics, he must manage all the new threats. These threats not only come from mafia rivals, but also from politicians and internal forces in Gotham. As we see in both the film and the series, Falcone ultimately adopts a very complex and strategic approach in dealing with his main rival, the Milioti family, and other threats in Gotham. His policies are presented to the public as a fight against corruption, but in reality, behind the scenes, he has full control over the corrupt systems. After Falcone's fall, Penguin decides to push his plans forward more seriously in Gotham. Not only does Penguin have ties to corrupt politicians in Gotham, but now he is also seeking complete control over every aspect of the city. The challenges and threats he faces have now become opportunities for him to expand his empire. Currently, the Milioti family is imprisoned in a facility on Gotham Island, which was also depicted in Nolan's films. This prison is one of the most famous and iconic in the city. However, the leadership of this family is now in the hands of Nadia, the wife of Salvatore Milioti. Nadia, played by Shohreh Aghdashloo, is actually an Iranian character. Interestingly, due to the deaths or imprisonment of many of their members, the Milioti family is now led by Nadia. Because of this, Nadia trusts no one and surrounds herself with Iranian members in the Milioti mafia. If you pay attention, all the members of the group have distinctly Iranian features, and even when negotiating with each other, they speak in Persian. Even more interesting is that Salvatore Milioti, Nadia's husband, learned Persian because of her. In this situation, the character Oz, Penguin, decides to use the Milioti family to diminish the power of the Falcones and gain more power for himself amid the chaos. The idea that comes to Oz's mind arises when he is watching an old movie, where an actor sings a song with the line, "Give her the ring." This line leads Oz to decide to give the ring, which is a symbol of mafia boss power, to the Miliotis in order to tempt them into reclaiming power. However, the story of the Miliotis is more complicated than it seems. Unexpectedly, this family also becomes linked with the Falcones. What's even more interesting is that Carmine Falcone's wife came from the Milioti family, and to strengthen the mafia alliance, a marriage between these two families was arranged. In the series, we don't see the exact reason why Falcone killed his wife, but in comic stories, it's narrated that Falcone discovered his wife was leaking mafia activity details to the Miliotis. As a result, while Carmine sends all members of the Milioti family to prison, he realizes he cannot continue living with his wife. This betrayal and his inability to continue their marriage lead him to decide to kill her. In this part of the story, increasingly complex aspects of the characters and their relationships begin to unfold. When Sophia was a child and saw her mother's lifeless body, a deeply impactful memory was formed in her mind. As she sought refuge in her father's arms, what stood out were the claw marks on Falcone's hand. These details reveal that her father was the one who strangled his wife. This is one of the key moments that highlights the character development of Falcone. When his daughter tries to take his sunglasses off, it symbolizes the mafia mask he wears. Interestingly, even in the presence of his young daughter, he never removes this mask. This suggests his deep influence and power in the underground world, where he doesn't even shed his mafia persona, even for his family. Despite his actions that make him a well-known and authoritative figure in the city, the killings continue. In the movie Batman, the introduction of Catwoman's character occurs because of her attempt to uncover the killers of young girls who worked for Falcone. These girls, employed at the Falcone's Club, a hub for illegal activities like drug trafficking, may have accidentally obtained information about Falcone's illegal dealings. In such cases, Falcone would strangle them himself. Catwoman's mother was one of these girls killed by Falcone, as was Catwoman's roommate, who then becomes involved in the story. When Falcone sends his daughter to Arkham, we realize that, had she not been his daughter, he would have treated her the same way as the others, by killing her. However, due to Falcone's political influence, he manages to imprison his daughter in Arkham Asylum. This facility, designed for holding criminals, symbolizes the corruption and inefficiency of Gotham City in the DC universe. Many of those sent to Arkham are turned into worse criminals. In the comic stories, Sophia is a much more complex character and, in fact, is the killer herself. However, in this series, one scene, after a shock treatment, when Sophia is thrown into a cell, she imagines the walls of her cell turning into wallpaper. Interestingly, this wallpaper is the same as the one from her childhood bedroom, the room where she first saw her mother's body. This symbolic detail connects to some is manufacturing these substances and sending them to Sophia. This character, who has not yet been introduced, is likely to play a key role in helping Sophia in future episodes. In fact, these drugs are the same substances used for experiments on patients in Arkham. In recent episodes, while Sophia was in Arkham, the girl sitting next to her received a drug reward that was exactly the same color as the new drug substance. In fact, this drug is the same one being manufactured inside Arkham. Later, Sophia's brother explains to Oz that he has a plan to distribute the new drug throughout the story progresses. Sophia's psychologist, who has resigned and left Arkham, is likely to play a more significant role in future episodes. This psychologist is probably involved in the production of the drugs and will play a key role in the mafia network that Sophia is building. At the end of episode 4, Sophia manages to escape from the Maroney family, although she is injured. When she picks up the phone to inform someone that Oz killed her brother, it shows that the psychologist plays a very important role in Sophia's life. Sophia places a lot of trust in this psychologist and even allows him to hypnotize her. The lights in the background of the psychologist's office are the same lights that used to be illuminated in Arkham cells during meetings. These lights serve as a symbolic representation of Sophia's return to her past and painful memories. The psychologist uses them to help Sophia's mind regress to the past in order to erase her memories. Alongside the role of the psychologist in the story, there is a painting on the wall of his office that profoundly represents Sophia's character. The painting depicts a person screaming, but their face is split in two. This is much like Sophia, whose father's influence caused a new persona to develop within her. She never allowed this new personality to come out and be seen. From the beginning of the story, we notice that Sophia always covers her neck, even wearing clothes to hide it because her neck is scarred. These scars are the marks of scratches she inflicted on herself in her sleep, a symbol of the nightmares left by her memories of her father. She used to sleep in a closet because she couldn't sleep comfortably in her bed. However, by the end of the episode, a new version of Sophia emerges. She no longer feels ashamed of her neck scars and wears a special outfit that fully exposes her neck. The color of this outfit is yellow, resembling the one she wore during her moment of freedom. In this transformation, not only the result of the birth of her new persona, but also represent her attempt to gain more power in her surroundings. In one scene, we see Sophia tied up, reminiscent of characters from The Godfather, caught in numerous internal conflicts. This film presents a mafia world where women have no place. But Sophia demonstrates that she can break this rule and take her revenge. In another scene, Sophia's lawyer hands her papers containing testimonies from her family members, claiming that she has psychological issues and may even harm others' corpse. Moreover, she keeps her father alive to use him against other people. Before committing this murder, Sophia goes to Johnny Vitti's room and opens the window. This action appears to be for smoking, but in reality, she intends to save Johnny Vitti's life. Oz's character also evolves remarkably in the story. Initially, he avoids any form of loyalty and betrays many people. In one scene, he intends to show photos of Johnny Vitti to Luca, but ultimately decides to help Sophia instead. Interestingly, Oz hates the idea of appearing weak. At the beginning of the story, he mentions that he avoids sitting on disabled chairs in the subway and has faced many struggles throughout his life. In a scene where childhood photos of him are displayed on his mother's house wall, there are no visible scars on his face, but later these scars become apparent. The name Penguin is chosen for Oz due to his limp and resemblance to penguins. Anyone who references him should expect his revenge. The influence of Oz's mother on his character is evident throughout the story. Oz despises verbal humiliation. This is similar to the stories of Daemon Targaryen and Mrs. Hadri. At times, Oz shows mercy to characters like Victor. In one scene, when Victor is stealing from a car, Oz, out of sympathy for him, saves his life and does not kill him. This empathy stems from Victor's weakness and his speech impediment. The story gradually delves into the humiliation of the characters. The humiliation starts with Sophia's words towards Oz. When Sophia was young, she told Oz in the car, "You're just a driver, so don't talk." This remark led Oz to inform her father and have her placed in a mental institution for 10 years. After this incident, when Sophia was working with the Chinese mafia, Oz betrayed her again. Eventually, the story reaches the mafia wars. From this point onward, we will see how mafia members, who show no mercy to each other, destroy one another. Interestingly, now Oz is alone, with no one to accompany him. The only character likely to remain as the most complex and influential is Victor. Due to his ambition and interactions with his family, Victor is likely to have an even more intricate story in the future. Hey friends, that's a wrap for today's video. I hope I was able to share some insights that make watching the series even more enjoyable for you. I truly appreciate you taking the time to watch the video. If you found it helpful and enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like. I look forward to seeing you in my next videos. Until then, I hope you have great days and wonderful moments ahead.